Good afternoon, dear activists, and it's very good to have you join us today for this chat on the general election. We have some reporters here covering the speech. Later on, I'll be taking some questions from them, but thereafter, we will adjourn for our own separate Q&A sessions. I would like to start by thanking all of you for your hard work and your many contributions throughout this campaign. The PAP received a clear mandate in this election. 61.2% is a solid majority of those who support and want a PAP government, although it is lower than what we had hoped for. Naturally, we are disappointed about losing one more GRC. The Sengkang team gave it their all, but the desire for more opposition was too strong. Our hearts also go out to our teams in Aljunied and Hougang. They have worked hard over many years to serve the residents and win back the ground. But these are hard grounds where we are the opposition, and it takes real commitment, courage, and resilience to fight there. So I thank everyone for your gallant efforts in this election. Overall, it is quite clear that voters wanted the PAP in charge. The opposition explicitly reassured voters that they were not aiming to replace the PAP. The opposition also did not seriously engage on the key issues with workable alternative solutions. Instead, they chipped away at unhappiness over different aspects of policies which have impacted voters. And we were up against a major trend that has been there for many years, and that is the desire to have more opposition in Parliament, to check the PAP, to have more diversity of views, and debate on policy alternatives. The party will do a thorough review of GE2020, but I wanted to share with all our activists this afternoon some of our preliminary thoughts and to set the results in context. First, let's touch on our expectations going into GE2020. What is the best that the PAP could have done in this GE as we were entering the general election? In fact, in the run-up to GE2020, PM had highlighted on several occasions that this was not going to be an easy election because of the pain and anxiety that Singaporeans are experiencing during this crisis. PM said it will be tough. He said this isn't a feel-good GE. Neither PM nor anyone in the Central Executive Committee expected a repeat of 2015. But many pundits and commentators thought that we could get above 70%. And the opposition capitalized on this and claimed that they feared a wipeout. But we should remember, only twice in the last 9 GEs has the PAP received anywhere close to 70% or beyond. Once in 2015, when we had sent 69.9%, that was our SG50 year and the year of MM's passing. And the second in 2001, after 9/11 attack, where we got 75.3%. These 2 GEs were outliers. In 7 out of 9 GEs since 1984, the PAP has won between 60 and 60% of the total votes. Indeed, in 4 out of these 9 races, we got 63% or less. So this year's 61.2% is the third worst outcome over 9 GEs across 36 years. It is at the low end of the expected range of 60 to 65%. It is not a very good result, but it is within the range of expectations, and we've been here before. The expectation that the PAP should have had a result at the top end this time, I think, has colored the outcome as a setback. Second, how should we interpret the results of GE2020? A reasonable expectation would have been to achieve an outcome around 64 to 65%. That means somewhere between the outcomes of the 2011 and the 2015 GEs. We came in at the low 60s, not 65%. That is about 4 percentage points less than we might have hoped for. That's roughly 100,000 votes lost. Why did the PAP fail to win this 100,000 votes? I'll share some of our initial thinking. First, we must give credit where it is due. The Workers' Party ran a good campaign that spoke to the desire amongst many for checks and balances. Their call to give the PAP government no blank check, I think, resonated with many people who wanted more opposition voices in Parliament. Second, we saw the emergence of a new party, PSP, with strong appeal in some parts of Singapore, cutting into our strongholds, in the West in particular. Third, this was a digital campaign, and we do not do so well in this arena. We tried our best. We produced a lot of good content online, but not all of this connected with netizens, especially on newer platforms like Instagram and Telegram, where the platforms require, different sort of content, say from a platform like Facebook. And as with a normal campaign, the negative messages carry further reach than positive messages, and this is further accentuated on the internet. A related point then is how we performed with younger voters who access most of the information online. In fact, much of the commentary that you read nowadays has focused on the young, and there have been suggestions that they have abandoned the PAP nationally. But let's again see this in perspective. In many constituencies across Singapore with young voters, we received good support. For example, in Punggol West, we won 61% of the votes. And there are some facts to bear in mind. First-time voters in the age of 21 to 24 are less than 10% of the electorate. In total, the 20s and 30s age group constitute roughly 1/3 of the electorate. But those who are 40 and above are close to 70% of the electorate. So the swing against the PAP was not concentrated solely amongst the young. And it was not just about unhappiness about the PAP style of campaigning or how we talk about race or POFMA. In particular, there was a fall in support amongst those in the 40s and 50s, and perhaps even in their early 60s. This was due primarily to the economic pain they have suffered, loss of income, difficulties faced by contractors and subcontractors, of whom there are many, businesses that have been disrupted, jobs that are lost or forced to downsize due to lower paying occupations. All of this hurt the PAP support. And this is quite understandable. Although we have made great efforts to lessen the pain and impact, there has been severe disruption to jobs and families. We also saw a fall in support among several private landed and private condominium dwellers, which could be related to the economic issues I just highlighted. In 2015, this segment had swung towards the PAP, but this time the support was not as strong, perhaps because they felt they were not sufficiently supported during the crisis. I have shared the reasons why the PAP didn't do as well as we had hoped for, but we should also recognize that this was a clear mandate and that voters want a PAP government. The outcome could also have been worse, especially given the difficulties that people were facing on the ground. So we also need to ask ourselves, why did the PAP manage to retain 61%? In fact, the PAP has never gone below 60% all these years, and that's because the base kept faith with the PAP, knowing that the PAP kept faith with its base. What is this base? They are the working class, the middle class, the heartlands of Singapore. And the PAP must continue to keep faith with our base. Our policies must always tilt in favor of the less fortunate and vulnerable. This is in the PAP's roots and DNA. We must never waver in our commitment to social justice, to preserve social mobility for all Singaporeans, and to build a more fair and just society. Finally, how do we move forward from here? It would be difficult to get near 70% as we did in 2015. This is because the desire for an opposition is strong, and even those who prefer the PAP as government would vote tactically for the opposition where it is credible. But we can aim to get at least the upper end of the 60% to 65% range. So the question is, what must we do to get back another 4% in the next general election? There will be many suggestions through the course of our thorough review, but there are two things that I would like to highlight. First, we must do a better job appealing to the young. We must work hard to understand and connect with young voters. They have different aspirations, hopes, and expectations. The issues they care about are different from the older generation and the older Singaporeans, and they also look at existing issues differently. So we need to build trust and a new social compact with younger Singaporeans. We also need to mobilize the young people so that they will do something not just for themselves, but for others needing help. In fact, quite a few of our MPs, especially the new ones, are young Singaporeans themselves who have come up the hard way and feel passionately about helping others to succeed. We will need to get more young people like them to identify with the PAP as a party that provides hope and a path to the future and build our bonds with a new generation of voters. Second, equally crucially, we have to address the economic pain of a substantial segment of those in their 40s and 50s. This is the sandwich group who are looking after elderly parents and also have young children to care for. We recognized this was an issue. This segment, this group, faced difficulties even before the COVID crisis hit us. But since then, I think the challenges have been exacerbated. Many of the schemes and programs in the 4 budgets this year were aimed at this group. Unfortunately, no amount of help will be enough in a crisis of this magnitude. So we will continue to review and update our policies, and we will do whatever we can to address their anxieties and pain during this difficult period. In every general election, we tell our candidates and activists there are no safe seats and we must fight for every vote. And we are reminded of this yet again in GE2020. The dynamics in every election is volatile and completely unpredictable. Sentiments can shift very quickly in 9 days and across the entire island. Sometimes people don't take us seriously when we say that you may have a freak election result. But in fact, this is quite possible, especially if the starting point is that the PAP will get about 60% of the vote. So let us all be prepared. Subsequent general elections will be much tougher than this one. And as I said, we are unlikely to exceed 65% of the vote in future. We are unlikely to exceed 65% of the vote in future. The desire for diversity in Parliament, for checks and balances is permanent. It is here to stay. And we must be prepared for this new reality. For now, Singaporeans want to see the PAP in power, but they also want a credible opposition to check on the PAP. And now that the Workers' Party has more MPs in Parliament, they cannot just continue asking the government questions. It is also their duty to put forward serious policy alternatives to be scrutinized and debated. In fact, the WP tells voters that they are not trying to take over the government, they are only seeking a stronger check on the PAP government, which is a message they know voters want to hear. The WP says that their long-term aim is to deny the PAP 2/3 of the seats in Parliament. But I have no doubt that they want to displace the PAP and form the government one day, except that they find it inconvenient to acknowledge this now. And there is nothing wrong with that ambition. It is what parties in parliamentary democracies exist for, to win over voters' confidence and support in order to win power, form the government, and carry out their policies. It is part of a democracy at work. So we must be clear-eyed about this. The PAP must argue for what we believe in, govern Singapore well, and keep on winning the trust and support from new generation of voters. Remember, the right to leadership cannot be inherited. Just because the PAP has governed Singapore since independence doesn't mean that it always will govern Singapore throughout. We must continue to strive to win the trust of our people, and we must prove that we can govern well. Then we can develop a stable political balance, and the PAP can continue winning future elections. Now that we have put the election behind us and elected a strong team to represent Singaporeans, let us stay focused on doing our best for Singapore and Singaporeans. We have 5 years to overcome the problems, consolidate on the ground, and show voters what we can do. Comrades, the work to win GE 2025 starts now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wong. Right now, we'll move into the Q&A session. Journalists, you will see that there are a few mics right in front of you. So we'll keep the questions to 5 questions for this session. So can I have the first one? Who would like to go first? Hui Min, you want to go up right front? Thank you.
Hi, afternoon. Chen Hing from Zapao here. I have 2 questions. First, there have been comments that the GE results indicate that electorates wish to see parties take the high road, and certain attacks by the PAP towards opponents were therefore not well received. Does the PAP see this as a contributing factor to your results? And second question is with regards to the private landed and condominium swing, was it nationwide or concentrated in certain constituencies, and how do you intend to win back these votes?
As I said earlier, there will be many factors contributing to the overall election result, and we will do a thorough review of which are the contributing factors. But I've highlighted several key reasons just now, and we believe that there are 2 areas that we will need to work on. One, working hard to understand and connect better with younger voters, with young Singaporeans. That could include the style of governance, the style of campaigning, but it would more importantly cover issues like understanding their aspirations, their hopes, their dreams, because I think for many young Singaporeans, the way they look at issues will be different from older ones, and we will need to connect with them and be a party that is able to represent their aspirations and bond with them, with a new generation of voters. Secondly, as I highlighted just now, there are real economic pains that significant segments of society are feeling. We identified those in their 40s and 50s, and perhaps even in their early 60s. And there are a whole range of reasons why this is happening. I mean, there are many subcontractors, thousands of them, who are unable to resume work for quite a while, and they are hurting. There are many who have lost their jobs, or even if they are still working, have had pay cuts. So these are significant issues which we will continue to have to address through this crisis period. So those are the key areas which we have highlighted. But again, through the review, there may be others, and we will look in a comprehensive way at the different things that we can do to improve and do better the next time. The issue of private landed and condominiums, I would say it's, you cannot make we wouldn't be able to make a generalization that this was the case across all private estates. There are instances in various constituencies where the private estates held up and continued to provide strong support for the PAP. But generally speaking, the support level across private estates this time was certainly not as strong as 2015. And I do think that part of that reason is also related to the economic issues that segments living in these areas face, because they might be business owners, they might be SME owners, and they would be facing considerable economic difficulties.
The second question, no problem.
Hi, this is Suhui from CNA. My question is, why is PAP holding this presser? Is it the first time it's holding this presser, and why is it that you are fronting it, not Heng Swee Keat or Mr. Chan Chun Sing or the PM? The second question would be, Mr. Pritam Singh has been appointed the leader of the opposition. What exactly are the resources that he'll be given? Will there be staff support or any salary, anything like that? Or even Sengkang GRC, will it have its own town council and stuff like that? Okay, thank you. The first question is very easy to answer, right? I mean, we do these updates from time to, after a GE, sometimes earlier, sometimes later, but I think after this particular general election, it would be useful to set the context of what our preliminary findings and assessment of the results. As I said, we are doing a thorough review, as we do after every general election. But this time around, we decided not to wait until the end of the review, which might take a month or more, but just to come out earlier to set this in context and to give our perspectives. I'm doing it today, but it could have been any one of us. I don't think you need to read too much into who is the spokesperson. Second question on the leader of the opposition, we said that there will be resources. Prime Minister highlighted that there will be support given for that role. That's still being worked out, and when the details are worked out, we will certainly, the government and Parliament will certainly announce what the resources are, or what the support, actual support will be. On the town council, that's actually not a subject for me to talk about, because the elected members in that constituency will have to decide whether they want to form their own town council or whether they want to combine with a neighboring GRC, and I'm sure they have already given some indications publicly, and I'm sure when they are ready, they will make their intentions and plans quite clear as well.
Junsen, you have a question? Yeah.
Hi, this is Junsen from Today. My question is, you went through the post-mortem of what actually happened at GE, but how much of these are actually new revelations versus what we've heard before in past years, the need to listen more to these groups of people? And secondly, how will it go forward in conducting this review? How deep will it reach within the roots of the party to listen to all these concerns?
Yeah, thank you. Some points I would say indeed, have been heard before in previous GE post-mortems. I think the need to improve our campaign online, we heard this in 2011 as well, the need to continue to appeal and engage younger voters, we are aware. So in a way, these are work in progress, and we will continue to work harder at it. Our online campaign, if you look at what we did in 2020 compared to 2015, compared to 2011, has improved, but obviously more needs to be done. And we cannot just be fighting the last campaign, because today we are dealing with platforms like Instagram and Twitter, Telegram, where I think I had one feedback from a young person saying, your videos on Facebook are not bad, but on Instagram, you cannot use the same kind of videos It's a very different platform. It needs to be shorter, it needs to be more easily accessible. So we need to understand that platform. But come 2025, it may not be Instagram, it may be a different platform, it may be TikTok or whatever other new platforms there are. So we will have to accelerate that work to master this new medium. Again, doing more than we have been already, but working doubly hard at this. And we have to do much more to also reach out and engage young Singaporeans, which we have been since 2011 as well, or in fact since previous elections, but again, a continued effort to do so, not just in government, but also through the party, to help them understand what the party stands for and how the party can develop strong bonds with a new generation of voters. But those are things that we have, as you said, may not be new, but they represent things that we feel are important and we should double down and work harder at them. But there are also new issues which I just highlighted. You know, the fact that this is a crisis, that there was significant economic difficulties that segments of the population faced is something, you know, specific to this election. We didn't see this in 2015, nor in 2011. And again, this is, it's not as though we went into this not knowing the issues, right? We knew that there were segments that were hurting. We knew about the challenges for the groups, that sandwich group in the 40s and 50s. That's why in the very first budget this year, you remember there was a Skills Future credit and we gave an additional $500, particularly for this group to help them do more with their updating of their skills. So we did recognize this as an issue, but I think given the magnitude of this crisis, it is really very hard. No matter what the kinds of resources that you can mount to help them, it is really very hard to talk about businesses that are facing difficulties, contractors who are unable to work because their workers still need to be cleared in the dormitories. You really cannot resolve all of these issues so quickly. And that's why we knew going into the election that this was a challenge. And I think the results have shown that indeed there is a challenge, or there are issues arising from this particular segment, and we will have to continue to work hard at thinking about ways we can help this group address the difficulties through this crisis.
We have, gentleman in orange first. Yeah, thank you.
Hi, Mr. Wong. Yan Liang from the Straits Times. Given that the PAP said that it has received a clear mandate rather than the strong mandate that Mr. Lee had hoped for, and who had argued prior to the election that a strong mandate was necessary, otherwise the party would be forced to become more populist and things like that, and the voter desire for more opposition voices and the voting trends that you mentioned, will it change how the PAP formulates policy to address the different messages that voters have sent the PAP's way? And also, when it comes to calls that the opposition has made, such as for stronger safety nets or to side more with the worker, things like that.
Thank you. Our position is clear throughout, that we have a clear mandate from this election. It allows us to pursue our agenda and policies. But at the same time, no policy is sacrosanct. There is never a policy that, you know, we say cast in stone and can never change. We are prepared to always review, update, and improve policies. But let's also be clear. Every change or every adjustment you make to a policy carries with it costs and benefits. There is upside, there is downside. In an election setting, it is very easy to get swayed by only the upside of a change without thinking through carefully what the downsides are, what the costs are to a particular policy change. But hopefully now that the election is over and we settle down, get into parliament, that's where more rigorous debates ought to be done to scrutinize not only government policies, but any alternative policies that the Workers' Party or opposition parties may wish to surface in Parliament, meaning the NCMPs. And the debate should be a two-way debate, not just looking at government proposals, asking for government policies to change, but also looking at alternatives and scrutinizing these alternatives, what their costs are and what the downsides are. It's very hard. It's very hard for anyone who has been involved doing policy work to find a policy that can be done to satisfy everyone. It's almost impossible, because if you can say, let's do it, but at the end of the day, someone has to bear the cost. It could be another segment today. It could be a future generation later on. But somehow, sometime, someone will have to bear some of the cost. Right? So I think what we need to do is to understand policy making is difficult work. It may not have the same emotive appeal as an election rally, but now we come to the hard work of governance and governing Singapore for the good of all Singaporeans and for the future of Singapore. So we hope, whether it's PAP or the Workers' Party, we can, in Parliament, have these rigorous debates, constructive debates that will enable better policies to be made for the betterment of all.
I think so we'll take the last two questions. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Good afternoon, Minister Wong. Sun Kiat from Wan Bao. Just like to know how will the review be done? When will the results of the review be made known publicly? And whether the review would include reconsidering whether DPM Heng is still the best leader to lead the 4G team? Thank you.
I think we are at the stage where we are still in a crisis. We are really looking at getting Singapore out of this huge crisis, healthcare, economic issues that we've just talked about. So our focus right now is to have the team all working as one, focusing on this, overcoming the crisis and emerging stronger from the crisis. It doesn't matter whether it's 4G, 3G, whatever G, right? I think whoever is in government, all of us are focused on this particular issue. There will be time later on to talk about succession, but now let's focus our minds on overcoming the crisis and getting through it. That's our main focus. On the review of the post-mortem, that will touch on the election itself rather than succession, right? So that's a different matter. The review of the post-mortem, which we do after every general election, will cover some of the ground which I've just described to you, and maybe some of the findings will be quite similar. Then they may well be new findings, and at an appropriate time, once the review is completed, we might do a similar press conference like this. It may be a different person, so again, maybe me, maybe someone else. Nothing to be read from the person helming it. Or it may be done later on at the party convention. Right? We find different occasions where we may share some of these, if there are additional things that we wish to share, both with our activists and also with the public.
We'll take the last question already. Maybe, from the lady CNA, yes.
From CNA Digital. I have two questions. Okay, one...
you don't have to tiptoe. You can bring down the mic.
Thank you. Okay, I think this was asked a bit earlier, but similar question. But there is still a lot of talk online saying that the approach that the PAP took to the Raisa's police report actually contributed to the loss in Sengkang. Okay, so does the party regret the tone that it took in that press release, pressing the WP for an answer? And then my second question is, did you all analyze as well if the handling of the COVID pandemic itself, how did it affect the results?
Thank you. Again, those are issues that we would certainly want to do, more thorough, deep dives in the course of the review. We do not have all the answers, as I said. The review is ongoing. But I would say on whether it's Raisa, whether it's the style of campaigning, and the perception that this might have turned off many young voters. And so the commentary sometimes you read suggests that young voters had abandoned the party, PAP, across the board, nationally. I would just say on that point, I don't think the facts bear it out, because we have seen across the whole country constituencies where there are similar demographics as Sengkang, or even polling districts, not just constituency, but you zoom in into the polling district with similar demographics, young families, young voters, many first-time voters, and in many of these areas, we saw majority support from young voters. So that's a fact. But whether or not we can improve, do better in terms of the style of campaigning, in terms of the approach, in terms of the way, the conduct of a campaign, and how we go about highlighting falsehoods that may arise during the course of the campaign, or issues that we think are of concern, I think that's fair, and that's something we do want to review and see how we can improve and do better in the future. There was one more question, right? Handling of COVID-19. We don't have the ability, we are not quite able at this stage to link to that precise factor, and that's again something we will have to dive deeper. But I would say it's more than as I described earlier, it's more than the handling of the pandemic, but it's the whole crisis put together. The fact that with COVID-19, you have businesses that are disrupted, SMEs that are hurting, business owners hurting badly, contractors, and many, many subcontractors who are unable to resume work. I think all of that came together during the election. And the effects, I think, contributed partly to the results that we had. Yeah.
Good afternoon, Minister. Thank you for taking my question. Could you share with us the preliminary thoughts on how has the PAP support been among the minorities? And then one more would be, if the GE was to be held later, maybe early part of next year when the crisis is much, how would the results be different? Thank you.
Yeah. I would say the same thing for minorities as for young people. We haven't done a very comprehensive study because all of this is ongoing, but in the broad scans that we have seen in different constituencies, it has not been the case that areas with high proportions of minority groups have swung significantly against us. I give an example in my own GRC in Marsiling UT. In Marsiling and Wood Grove in the north, we have a significant share of minority families, higher than the national average. And when we looked at the results, it was not the case that the polling districts with higher minority share swung more significantly. We didn't see that pattern. So I think it's premature to conclude and make a generalized statement about how they might have voted. I think there may be different patterns across different constituencies, but I wouldn't conclude, I wouldn't be able to say, right, at the overall level, whether or not there was any swing amongst the minority group at this stage. Many of them, even if they have voted against us, it might not have been an issue of race or issues related to the issues that they identified with as a community, but related more to national issues around jobs, around incomes as well. So we will have to tease out the factors. On what would the outcome have been if we had held the elections later, I don't have a crystal ball and I will not be able to speculate. All I can say is this. We have had people say, why hold elections now when there is COVID-19? But the point is this, COVID-19 is going to be with us through for many, many more months and likely very, very likely till next year. I can't see any possibility of this diminishing at the end of the year, for example. Already, if you look at the second waves that other countries the resurgence in cases that other countries are seeing, it all looks like there may be a bigger flare-up globally, right? Whether or not we face it in Singapore is a different matter. We are trying very hard to prevent a second wave, but certainly the virus situation around the world is not slowing down. It is continuing to rise, it is continuing to flare up in many places, and this will continue through the end of the year and beyond to next year. So, under that circumstance, given the timing for which the election has to be held, it will be a COVID-19 election. But whether or not it's held today, end of the year, early next year, it will be held under a COVID-19 situation. Precautions will have to be taken, but how voters will react, it's really hard to say. No one can tell. But I think we've called the elections at the time that we did. Singaporeans have spoken. We respect the decisions that Singaporeans have taken. And now that the election is over, as we have said, let's come together as one country, because we are still in the midst of a huge crisis. Let's work hard to overcome this crisis. And then let's look forward when Parliament convenes to a new configuration. For the first time, we will have many more representation from the opposition, in particular from the Workers' Party, and we look forward to engaging with them on different policy alternatives, debating the options or the proposals that they put up, just as I'm sure they will question government policies, and hopefully we can find a new political balance for Singapore that will work for the long-term good of all Singaporeans.